There you go.
All right. And I think, let's see. All right. So the first thing, we have a couple of updates. Zach, where do you want to start on updates?
Well, so I got, there are a couple like slides that we could talk about. And I put political working group on there. I wasn't sure if there had been any more conversation with that group and if anybody wanted to share anything about steps you've taken or not taken or what else, where all that was going. So that was just kind of an opening for the group.
So I did want to have two conversations related to that. I wanted to ping people. 2 weeks ago, we had a few folks volunteer to be a part of reaching out to council members and staff to try to talk to them about the climate, about our carbon goal and about the Tableau tool. And we are, for districts 1 through 5, we don't have a primary contact from the political working group signed up to reach out to those folks. 6 through 10, we do, and then we need someone to reach out to the mayor's team. So if you were one of those people who volunteered, please do that by today. Please sign up, and I'll send, actually, I will just share this spreadsheet that is a sign-up sheet in the chat if folks want to sign up. I'm asking for a primary and a secondary person to reach out to each district or mayor's office. You know, the primary being the person who's doing the outreach and coordination, and the secondary who can attend the meeting and help support. You know, specifically because I want to make sure that each meeting has someone from the goal working group attending, so that they can explain kind of the background about how that process went about. Even though I'm happy to help set up with the connections that I know. So anyway, I just posted that in the chat. So if you volunteered, please fill that out today. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about the working group is, you know, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about making sure that we're clear about the role of the political working group and the steering committee, and how that group is a liaison to or works with the Joint Sustainability Committee. So I think that, you know, we had some recent work of that group that helped to influence a recent Joint Sustainability Committee recommendation, but that JSC recommendation did not explicitly say things about the climate plan. It talked about budgeting for climate-related initiatives, but you know, I think I want to make sure that we're not confusing the partners who have said that we're going to work with them on creating a collaborative process by blurring the line between the political working group and the work of the steering committee and the Joint Sustainability Committee. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, just in terms of what the Joint Sustainability Committee does. You know, I think that it's really important that that body remains independent, that they can be critical, and that they can push forward recommendations that make sense. That's the entire point of boards and commissions, is to be a community-led oversight for what, you know, we're doing in our city. The political working group, I think I want to make sure that the advocacy that we're doing on behalf of the steering committee is very directly related to this plan. And if folks disagree with this framing, please let me know. But you know, I think in the beginning of us working on the community climate plan, we committed to our city partners that we wanted to make sure that anything that is happening on behalf of this planning process or being put into the plan is something that we were going to get buy-in and consensus around. And if we needed to mediate some sort of disagreement about best path forward, about what makes it into this plan, that we were committed to doing that. And we haven't really had a chance to do that yet. And because we have not gotten into the details of what's making it in this plan or not. But I was a little concerned about the blurred line between JSC making a recommendation about budget even though it's related to climate, versus what a political working group might do as a part of the steering committee in relation to advocating for this plan. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that, Katie. Agreed.
Zach, was that a waving?
I was just waving hi.
Cool. What else? What do you does that make sense to everyone?
Well, and I guess the only thing I would add is that you were talking about this in terms of the Joint Sustainability Committee. I think across all the members on this group, there are other boards and commissions that are also connected with as well. So like this should just probably be a blanket sort of thing that like what boards and commissions do is different from what like this community-led steering committee does.
Good point.
Yeah, and I guess let's just make sure that we're daylighting any interaction that we're having between commissions. Obviously we want to make sure that, like for instance, environmental commission meetings, I'm updating environmental commission on, the progress of this plan because I'm integrally involved in it. And, I think that there have been times when, folks on these commissions have asked me, like, should we be passing any kind of recommendation to support y'all? And I think at this point, we're really in a bringing people along stage, at least in my opinion. And so I haven't felt a need to bring boards and commissions into any formal role in supporting the work that we're doing. But I think that, I think as a steering committee, I really want to make sure that people still feel bought into this consensus-driven, work around what this plan will include. So, okay.
Katie,
all right. Yeah.
So I'm on the Asian Quality of Life Commission, and I think that once everything is done, I do believe that we do have a plan to have a recommendation to support this initiative. And I would love to see, especially like the groups around demographics, like, the Hispanic, the African American, because it is around equity. So I do think that having recommendations from those groups is really good when it comes time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that I think that we need to build consensus within, and then there will be consensus among, some of those groups. And I think that we just haven't really crossed that bridge yet internally, and we're getting there because now we have content to build consensus around. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think what I wouldn't want to happen is to have different quality of life commissions say, we support this piece of it, or we disagree on this point. I think like the entire point of this is that, we're trying to find a space where people are on the same page and trust this process and, feel like this will be impactful, across the board. So anyway, I think we still are getting there, but.
I mean, just to add very quick to that, I think that we have gotten really good about how the commissions reaching out to each other and one commission creating a recommendation and then having the others sign on. So I think that that's gotten really streamlined. So I hope that happens for this.
I think it will. I think it will.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments before we go on to other updates?
Katie, so just to I guess understand where you're coming from, is the concern that what happened in terms of the budget recommendation that spurred from the political working group and went to the Joint Sustainability Committee, was that sort of crossing some sort of boundary?
I think it blurred a little bit of a boundary, and so I think that because it was not making an explicit connection to the community climate plan, and it spoke to climate work in general around budget recommendations, I think that coming from JSC is perfectly fine. But I think it caught some folks off guard who were expecting more involvement in the development of something like that. if it were to be coming straight from the steering committee. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And yeah, so I
But
think
that
like
item
more,
didn't come from the
Right.
steering committee.
that's what I'm saying. But the steering committee helped to develop content for it. The political working group did, and so I think that's where I think we just need to be careful and make sure we're communicating about like if folks on the steering committee in some sort of formal sense are influencing something a board or commission is passing in an interim sense, not once we have consensus around this project. I think we just need to make sure that that's not causing some discomfort from the folks in the room. We really want to make sure we're all on the same page with. Or if it is, talking through it, you know? Does that, am I too vague, or is that all making sense?
I feel like it has gotten more vague.
I think anytime the political working group is influencing something that's going to be passed at a board or commission, I think we need to daylight it at the steering committee as an agenda item and talk about specific content, and have the steering committee buy in as a whole to what is being put forward. It's directly related to the climate plan. If it's not, and that recommendation speak directly to the climate plan, it spoke to budget recommendations around climate, but did not say the climate plan, did not say the climate plan steering committee. That is something that I think we cannot mess with the Joint Sustainability Committee's ability to make independent decisions about what they pass. Does that make sense?
Yep, that's back to the clarity that I thought I was hearing from you initially, and
Yeah.
I agree with that.
All right. I want to move on. If folks feel like they're still unclear, reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk more about this. And I think it's important that we're all on the same page about this kind of stuff. All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in really fast, like 30 seconds. And, maybe going forward, we just need to be more intentional about delineating things. I think in particular with this, in this instance, it wasn't made clear when the JSC recommendation was talked about in the steering committee meeting. It wasn't. I think the way it was discussed was also kind of blurring the line. So maybe we also need to be more intentional at making clear that, this is a commission recommendation separate from the steering committee when we discuss what other commissions are doing in future meetings.
Totally agree that all should be framed as an FYI update, not a look at this thing we helped with. And I think that should have been the framing for that. We want to keep people in the loop, but be more clear about the stuff we're talking about. Yep. Cool. All right. Anything else from other updates from working groups or anything else on that you wanted to talk about, Zach?
Yeah, the other update, which is very related, is that we talked about boards and commissions outreach a few weeks ago. And so Celine reached out to, 20 some boards and commissions, all the ones in the JSC, plus the quality of life commissions, and essentially asked them, like, we realize your schedule and your meetings are messed up right now, but we wanted to just give you a preview of what's going on with this climate plan before we give you the full, the draft plan in August. And we asked them, do you want a presentation, or would you share a webinar link? And almost all of them just responded back and said, our agendas are full, so if you have a recorded webinar, we will share it with all members. So Celine and I last week recorded, a 30-minute webinar, which is, here's where we are here's where we've been, here's where we are now, here's where we're going with the plan, and then shared that out with all of these different boards and commissions. So they have the option to review it, and we put our emails in there. We haven't heard any, much back, but we put it all out there, and then essentially just told them we'll be back in the next couple months. We just wanted to make sure you were on notice that this was happening.
Yeah, the only quality of life commission that didn't respond yet even after my follow-up is the Hispanic Latino quality of life. So the people that didn't respond, I'm just keeping the emails going to them, but everyone else has, and they have the link and slide deck. And I linked them as well to like all the other previous webinars that we've had throughout the presentation. So they are aware of the equity tool webinar, link to our Google Drive, the public calendar, if you didn't know already. And yeah.
Great.
Hey, Zach, this is Alberta. I had a question about the webinar. Is that someplace that we can all access that as well if we wanted to just kind of look at that and see what sent out to them?
Yeah, it's like, I think it would be good to share to whoever. It is public. I'll send out the link after the meeting if you all wanted to distribute it anywhere, because it is like a background presentation on our climate plan and where we're at this point. So that's a good idea.
I think that would actually be a great thing to, put out on the website and maybe even on social media, so that people know that's the context of the plan.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yep. Easy to do. And thank you on this point. Thank you so much to Renee on the steering committee. He has been helping us with when we get the recordings done. I'm not sure exactly what he's doing behind the scenes, but he's making them look produced. So
yeah, he's adding closed captioning and any tech glitches, like lag time between the.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just so it looks.
So they look really good. It's a YouTube link. It works. It looks professional. And that's all from Renee helping. So thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Cool. All right. Well, if that is it on updates there, then we're going to jump right into the majority of this meeting is really just updates on advisory group work. And so we'll jump right into that. Yeah,
so I was going to jump over. So now I'm sharing the slides. I don't know, at the end of the, at the end of last meeting, we had this conversation about the title and about who was going to volunteer for different groups. So this slide here has, I asked everybody to vote. We didn't get votes from everyone, but this is how the votes sort of came out on the title. Can everybody see that?
Can you make the text bigger or make the preview?
I'm on audio, so can you read it at all?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the most votes were for this longer title, which may be like a title and then a subtitle. Austin Community Action Plan for Climate, Health, and Equity. That got the most votes. Second number of votes, 3 votes, was Austin Climate Equity Plan, which is simple. And then just 1 vote each for Austin Community Climate Equity Action Plan, which is kind of a lot of words. And then 1 vote for Austin Climate Equity Action Plan. So
I didn't vote, but I do like the idea of the first one with part of that as a sub heading.
Okay. Yeah, and this doesn't need to be finalized today. This is just to show you guys where we're at. I like the idea of, community, action, climate. I mean, that kind of has all the words in it. I think we'll just have to figure out how to display it in the right way.
Any other comments?
Okay, and then next thing was I also asked for the group to, from the steering committee, to sort of give us your thoughts on where you might be most willing to do work outside the meetings in the next few months, because there's going to be a lot of commenting and reviewing of documents, and we're not going to be able to do all of that in these steering committee meetings. So I sort of broke it up into these 4 pieces. The first one was, and this one will start essentially like next Monday, was reviewing the goals and strategies and details and sort of working to approval. This is who signed up for that. Plan document writing and drafting. Very soon here, we're going to be, and we've already started some of it, we're going to be actually like drafting the words in the plan. A couple of people have volunteered to help with that. And then the bulk of, the third one here, this is probably almost everybody in the steering committee is going to participate in this, is the actual like full plan document review and commenting. There's going to be, 3 drafts of that. I know everyone is going to want to like review all the words. So we can probably count almost everyone in on that one. And then the last one here was support with boards and commissions, management, council, like presentation support. And this would be like when we're nearing the end of this process, I'm envisioning having more folks from the steering committee like up there presenting like with me, and and not just me like doing the presentation. So those are the volunteers. So
If we didn't volunteer, can we still do that?
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just shoot me an email.
Yeah, Zach,
Say that again, Susanna.
oh yeah, I thought I had signed up for the boards and commissions.
Okay.
And the board, I'd like to be on the plan document too, with Nakia and.
Great. So yeah, and this is not, there's going to be plenty of time to volunteer. So I was just trying to show everybody kind of where we were at. I am going to go with this list here of Shane, Nakia, Mayuri, Katie, Ben, Rodrigo, Yoop. If anyone wants to like be part of this initial goal and strategy review, let me know. That's going to start, I think, on this coming Monday. We will have all of the draft goals and strategies like consolidated in one place. And we're going to try to do like a 2-week kind of like review comment process with that. So,
Yep.
I can't hear that person. This
yeah.
is Brandy. You can add me to the goal strategy and review process, please.
Okay.
If there are a few folks commenting in the chat too, if there's other groups that you want to be added to, just post in the chat and we'll make sure we add you in.
Great. We'll get those added. All right. So now, I mean, we're
Katie, Zach, sorry, this is Drew. I'm not on the chat, but Zach, I'm happy to do anything that needs to be done. So if there's a gap that you need a body, feel free to put me on there and just let me know.
Okay, perfect.
And sorry for not having responded earlier.
Yeah,
that's all right. And actually, just so we know, I forgot to do this at the beginning. Drew, you're the 202 number. Is that right? 202-247-0520?
Yeah, sorry. I was on mute. That's me.
It's okay. And I just wanted to triple check. Other numbers, we have 512-585-5463. And 936-332-2729.
Oh, 939 is Kianis.
Okay.
That's one of our community climate ambassadors.
Great. And just so that we have record of who attended these meetings, and also trying to make sure that we keep a space that has accountability but is safe. That's, I think, the spirit of wanting to make sure we know who's logging into these. So 512-583-5463. If that person can just let us know who they are, that would be great. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Zach.
All right. So now to the main event. So these, all the advisory groups have been working for months on studying these issues, lots of conversation, lots of research. And now we are getting to the point of like by Friday and probably by Monday, actually like having the full draft of goals and strategies. There may be a couple that are going to kind of come in straggle in, but we are most of the way there. So the idea today was to give everybody kind of like the preview of where we're at right now. So we have all 5 of the groups set up here. There are 2 slides for each group. And kind of the breakdown is that the first slide is the sort of sub goals. So for that sector, what is the advisory group projecting that would need to be accomplished by 2030 in order for us to be on track with our emissions trajectory. So they're quantitative, they're focused on 2030, And so that's the first slide. And then the second slide is not all of the strategies that are being proposed. It's just a highlight of 4 strategies. It's sort of 2 that are good ones. So ones that really seem to highlight like equity, environment, and economy, and kind of like all the things. And then a couple that maybe like aren't totally baked yet, that might need a little bit more help. So I think what we're going to try to do here is, we've got plenty of time. I think we're going to try to keep each of these groups to like 10, 15-minute conversation. And there's going to be plenty of time for reviewing the full proposals and all that stuff. So the idea here is just to like give everybody a preview. If you have thoughts on where, things that should be edited or changed, or like direction given like right now, just chime in. So yeah, that's where we're at. Let's just jump right in. So the first one we're going to go through is transportation and land use. And I'm going to let Mark Couder jump in and speak for his group.
Hey, everybody.
Mark, thanks.
Sure. As I said, I'm helping with the Transportation and Land Use Advisory Group. And as I mentioned before the last presentation, we're breaking it up into 2 sections, right? We have transportation and land use. And for each, we have 3 goals.
Can you share your screen?
I'm using Zach's screen.
Okay.
Do you want to ask Zach to make it larger?
So, hey, I'll just so you know, in the email Zach sent out about the meeting, there's the presentation link, so you can open it there, in case that's easier.
Okay. So for transportation, we have 3 goals. One is tied to transit, and that is for by 2030, 20% of commuters, so people going to and from work, will use transit. For goal 2, it was focused on people power. So this would be bicycles, walking, wheelchairs, etc. And then by 2030, 15% of commuters will go to and from work by people power transportation. And then for goal 3, we originally called this VMT, but we're going to have to figure out a better name. So we just called it just less cars in general. And that goal is tied more to people who work from home. So by 2030, 20% of Austin residents would work from home. For land use, we started with the People's Plan, and we also looked at the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint, and are looking now at, by 2030, we produce 100 deeply affordable units each year until 2030, and then preserve 10,000 affordable housing units by 2030. And then for transit-oriented development, which will also change the name, and regional activities, we're actually talking about that this week, so we haven't really landed on goals, but we hope to by the end of this week or early next week. Here are a sample of strategies. The first one is focused on transit. There was a lot of interest in making transit free. That's the first thing we talked about months ago, and we've tried to keep that through the whole process. We pulled out one strategy here from the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan for free and low-cost transportation tools. So how do we ensure that low-cost transportation or free transportation is provided to most people in need? The second one is pulled directly from the People's Plan, is to look at city-owned land and see how we can think of quickly creating low-income housing units on city-owned land. Here specifically it's 8 properties, but we'd be happy to talk about more properties. And then 2 actions that still need more work. There's this concept around mobility hubs, creating family-friendly mobility hubs for people to learn more about transportation or connect to other forms of transportation. But we really haven't defined what that is and where that is. And then lastly, bicycle facilities. I think bicycles in general are seen as positive, but are sometimes seen as proof of gentrification. So we definitely want to talk a little bit more about that, and how do we really create actions that are both equitable and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
I don't know if you're inviting comments, but I think that.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, so right now, so next 5-10 minutes, just chime in. Let us know what you think.
Just on the bicycle facility maintenance, I would just include the word bicycle facility expansion and maintenance, because I mean there's there's quite a bold bike map, vision for what's to be built. But sort of our plan should back that. I would think.
Yeah.
So to be
Yep.
clear, this is just one of several actions for bicycles, and we do have one to expand. So I do want to mention that these are only 4 out of maybe 16 actions or more actions. So we are definitely looking at bicycles beyond just the maintenance of roads.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and keep that in mind with all of these, that there's a lot more just this. It would just take us hours to go through all of it.
Mm-hmm. I was going to also say, I think, how you're is important. And I think like on the bicycle stuff, for instance, I mean, the city is about to go under contract to update their urban trails and sidewalk master plan. And specifically in that RFP had a lot about equity. And so I think also looking at where we are in potential other planning processes that need to embody some of the ethos that we have had kind of thought through here. I think that's a really important connector that we need to make. And the other thing I was going to say is, similar, but the 100 units of affordable, I mean, that being tied to like understanding more about how that is maybe tied to the Austin strategic housing blueprint, which I know looks at units by district that are needed. I think a little bit more context for how that number came about, as people are saying on the chat, and how it ties to other existing plans would be good.
Do you want that right now or just in the plan?
Sure. I mean, if you want to talk through that, I think a few people are asking similar questions. You've asked about the mobility stuff. Austin Strategic Mobility Plan is another one that needs to connect to. I think it'd be good if you can kind of talk through y'all's thought process on that.
Yep.
Sorry that my dog is loudly drinking water right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these goals we first started with existing plans because, for example, the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan had already identified goals, and so did the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint had already defined goals. And what we did is we looked at those goals and then asked the question, like, is it really sort of getting to us where we want to be? And then should we augment those goals? So make them more stringent or make them more, I guess, a bigger goalpost, to use a metaphor. So for example, for the first one, by 2030, 20% of commuters would get to and from work by transit. That is higher than what the, I think it was 15% in the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan. But our discussion was basically, if we're just going with the existing goals, what are we changing and how are we changing the discussion? So by increasing by just a little bit amount, do we really make a difference in equity, and do we really make a difference in greenhouse gas reductions? So all these goals we're taking from existing plans and just augmented or made a little bit more aggressive to really make the discussion more important. So we're trying to keep them reasonable, but then now what we have to do is test them. We've identified these goals. Can we actually reach that goal with greenhouse gas emissions? In some of these cases, we might be. In some of these cases, it might be way over aggressive. And then how do we really change the discussion on equity by looking at these goals? Is it for the whole city, or is it for specific areas that might have benefits from these goals?
Yeah, and Kevin is taking these numbers, and we're doing that across all these groups where we have now percentages that are being proposed, taking those and checking them against like what is in the emissions model and how do they stack up. So these are all more aggressive than current plans and targets.
Can I ask a question or two questions? One is on the transit thing. I know that the city is not Cap Metro, but can we include in and maybe it's in your sub strategies, but that the transit mechanisms be carbon free? That like if our buses and commuter vehicles and stuff like that are not part of the pollution, the carbon emissions, that'll help even more than just people getting on them in general. And then do you want to address that, and then I'll ask the other one?
So we do have Giannis from Cap Metro in the advisory group helping out, and to Katie's point, we definitely want to connect all these to upcoming planning processes. And as you might know, Project Connect is coming up, and we're trying to figure out how we can get this sort of embedded into that process so that we can definitely be having the same conversations and leveraging our communication. That said, we haven't really talked about electric buses. I would assume that might fall under electric vehicles, but I'm going to ask Zach for that.
Okay, yeah, maybe.
Yep, that's a good point. It's connected.
Okay, and then can you go to the other slide for a second? Oh, yeah, my question was, can you guys, I haven't researched as many other cities. I've traveled among US cities, but are there successful transit entities that have free or low cost options? I know in other cities it costs, you know, $2-3 per trip. And I'm just wondering, can we set ourselves up for success? Are there maybe European or other cities that have got a free or low cost option that's working?
I mean, we can definitely ask Cap Metro about that. I mean, in our quick and non-scientific research, we have found other cities that do have free bus transit. They're typically in more tourist areas and downtown areas. But we did have a discussion about this, and I think, and I'm speaking out of term here, but I think it's like 20% of Cap Metro's income comes from fares. And so there is a possibility of going to zero if we somehow offset the 20% from somewhere else. So it is a possibility. And actually right now, buses are free because of COVID. So it is possible. And we're trying to figure out how to make that universal.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Kansas City, Missouri has free transit, and I think Boston is currently considering that.
Thank you.
That's really cool. We should definitely look into those strategies. I just want to chime in. This isn't a strategy, but it's really important to know the history and that fares were added in. A large part of the political strategy of adding fares to buses in Austin was intentionally to keep homeless people from riding them. And so if we're going to be centering equity, we need to understand that that's been part of the context, and that's going to be something we need to take into account going forward.
That's a good point.
And there's a whole thread in the chat about how did we come up with 100 deeply affordable units? That seems extremely low.
So that is pulled directly from the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprints. And essentially what it says is create 100 units per year and they have a specific title of what kind of housing they were talking about. In our discussion, and I want to give a shout out to Joey here in the advisory group, is that if it's not deeply affordable, then then it's not really making as much a difference as it could. So we changed it to creating 100 deeply affordable units per year in Austin over the next 10 years. Like I said before, we're trying to tie to existing plans, and if we can't get neighborhood housing on board with this, then it's going to be really hard to achieve those goals. But we can look at potentially increasing that, but we'll have to have more political will.
So is what you're saying that the strategic plan states to only create 100 deeply affordable total?
Per year.
Per year. Okay, so this isn't an increase from that plan, or is it?
It's not an increase in number; it's an increase in type. Deeply affordable is hard to get to. Deeply affordable is like 20%.
Right. Okay. So what was the change? Sorry, it's hard to follow everything that's been said. So what did the strategic plan say, and you changed it to 100 deeply affordable?
Yeah. So the strategic housing blueprint talked about creating a certain type of affordable housing, 100 per year of affordable housing, but that type is, hold on. Yeah, sorry, man. My daughter's trying to sharpen a pencil next to me. So in the Strategic Mobility and Housing Blueprint, I'm not exactly sure I know the definition of what they want to build 100 of every year, but it wasn't deeply affordable. And we thought that if we make it more deeply affordable, it is more aggressive. And I think move the needle on sort of how much of an impact we're going to have in the community. But we can get you that information.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just didn't catch that change when you initially said it. So produce 100 new deeply affordable units each year and preserve 10,000 affordable units. Have y'all considered, or is there a possibility to add, produce 100 deeply affordable and preserve 100 deeply affordable in addition to the preserving 10,000 affordable units?
So preserving 100 and preserving 10,000? I missed that.
So in your slide under the land use, so goal 4, it says produce 100 deeply affordable units per year, and then preserve 10,000 affordable preserve 10,000 affordable housing units.
Yep.
Could you add preserve 100 affordable deeply units per year in addition to those two things that are already in that goal?
Sure.
Just as an idea.
Yeah. I'll add it and then run it by the advisor group.
Great, thank you. And I'm a big fan of all of Joey's work. They're awesome.
Yeah.
I think in order to get through all of the groups, I think we probably need to move on to the next slides. Keep posting comments in the chat, and again, everyone's invited now to all the different working group meetings. So if these are particularly interesting and you want to dig into them more, please make sure you can try to attend those meetings. And just a reminder that, the way we tried to make sure we could tackle some of this content was each one of these will have 2 TAP strategies and 2 that still need some work, but that there are, again, like a lot more strategies that are making up, the work of the higher level goals. So.
Hey, Katie, can you hear me?
Yeah, yep.
This is you. I wonder if the group did a bit more work on what actions do we need to take to reach the goals that were stated on the first slide? Because those goals seem relevant and ambitious, and I think we're going to need those to reach our climate goals that we're proposing to council. Looking at the strategies, it seems like they're all good strategies, but they will never make us reach those goals that are on the slide before. So where are the actions required? Where is the analysis of the actions required to actually hit those goals? And then for us to say how feasible or reasonable is that, and make recommendations to the boards and commissions and to council. And I'm wondering where this ties to all the working groups, and I'm just wondering from Mark where they are on that aspect. And this is a summary of what their work is, but it seems like I'm missing how we reach those goals.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I think the first thing is that, because we're just showing you this snapshot, you're not seeing the whole picture. So when you see more of the full picture, you'll see how this stuff fits together. I think the second thing is that, like in this section, Project Connect and Cap Metro's plans, we will highlight how their plan fits into this, because just the strategy that we write out is not gonna be the full implementation answer of how we get there. So it's going to have to be this kind of piece together, here's what we propose, here's what builds on city activity, here's what else is going on, and here's kind of how we see it fitting together. So I'd just say more to come on that. You're not going to get the full digested answer in this presentation.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so today we're probably one level above that. Okay, so let's jump to the next one. So next one is transportation and electrification. Can everybody see the screen? So the first goal we went through was fewer cars, getting people out of cars, reducing reliance on cars. Then the second half of that is we realize that because of our development patterns and because of our culture and our world, there are still going to be cars on the road. So those cars that are remaining, we need to be doing everything that we can to electrify those cars. using Austin Energy's near zero carbon electricity in the coming decade is a major strategy to reduce emissions from transportation. So here are the three goals that we have here. So the first one is around vehicle adoption. So by 2030, 40% of total vehicle miles traveled in the city of Austin are electrified. That turns out to be approximately 400,000 electric vehicles on the road, like a mix of light duty and heavy duty. The idea there with setting it around vehicle miles traveled is that, we don't want to be like encouraging more and more cars. We want to be electrifying what is left of vehicle miles traveled in the city. The second goal is then directly connected to that one. So this one's not finalized yet, and we're still having back and forth about this one, but here's where it is now. So where it is now is by 2030, have 26,000 publicly accessible charging points in the Austin area. And where we get 26,000 is that's based on this 15-to-1 industry recommendation for publicly accessible points. It would be a mix of the different kinds of charging points, and that would essentially be enough to support 400,000 electric vehicles. And you would have a lot of home charging. So there's that. And then the third one, this group has been called emerging issues. And so a lot of the conversation around emerging issues is around job training and workforce development, but then also like how to make this a regional effort. Because a lot of the people who use cars are using cars to drive long distances and to drive from suburban areas into Austin and back. So the goal here isn't quantitative, but Austin Round Rock MSA would be a leader in policies and technology best practices to maximize the benefits for all of the shift to an electrified regional transportation system. So the idea there is to partner with surrounding communities, surrounding electric providers, and have the right things going on to actually benefit from this whole thing and to create as many equity benefits as we can across this system. So here are just some highlights on strategies. So the first one is around sharing and rideshare. We realize that like people owning vehicles is not necessary in all places. So the idea here was create a urban electric vehicle sharing program centered on low-income communities and communities of color. And then also establish incentives, regulation, and education for taxi and TNC drivers to convert those fleets to electric, aiming for 100% of the electrification of that sector by 2030. The second one is continued support for EV charging. So incentivize EV charging infrastructure, prioritizing underserved areas such as existing multifamily properties, geographically underrepresented areas in terms of charging now, and low to moderate income communities. Innovative placements of EV charging should also be explored, such as light post charging, mobile charging solutions. There's a lot of kind of new options in that space. So then two that sort of still need some work and we need to figure out some more details on. The first one was, it's kind of vague around regional leadership. So how would we adopt policies that enable and support EV adoption in the 5-county MSA? Because we don't have jurisdiction in all those areas. And so how can we promote strategies that utilize EVs to support the grid, support community resilience, maximize air quality benefits, and support clean and green economic growth? So I think that one probably needs some tweaking. And then the last one here is there is a huge, especially we've seen recently, there is a huge growth in delivery vehicles, right? Like more stuff is being delivered to people's houses than ever. And right now, all of those vehicles are essentially diesel vehicles. So how do we incentivize rapid electrification of those vehicle fleets? And is it through pilots, incentives, targeted infrastructure deployment? Like, how do we actually support that in a way that's not like, a corporate giveaway, but this area has like a huge opportunity for cleaning up the air and creating carbon benefits. So how could we aim to support those companies to get to 100% electrification by 2030? All right, so comments, questions on this section?
I guess
Well,
just a question on I saw you had a mix of level 1, level 2 DC fast charging. Was there any more detailed conversation about what that mix should look like?
That's kind of some of the back and forth right now. There's some really good, I think there's a DOE specific calculator that you can enter in vehicles and vehicle mixes, and it will give you like what they estimate you need in terms of level 1, level 2 DC. But we haven't sort of settled on like what should specifically be proposed.
Okay, then I guess kind of like in a related vein, says vehicle miles traveled in the city. Are we thinking, or are you thinking, is the group thinking about, you know, miles that also are, you know, people that are coming from elsewhere, that are coming from outside the city into the city? Is that part of that goal?
Part of it. Because when you look at our transportation emissions and the VMT numbers, it includes inbound and outbound trips. So yeah, so you would have to, we're setting the goal for our city of Austin number, but yeah, you would have to have a significant amount of inbound trips like captured.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess then, yeah, just kind of back to my initial question about the DC charging, just, you know, as an EV driver, you know, I have a Bolt, I can get to Houston. I've never driven my car to Houston though, because there's never access to a charger that would charge me up quick enough to be able to like get back to Austin. So just, you know, I think that's of critical importance, is to have DC fast charging that is, you know, distributed around the city and, you know, pretty readily available if we want to be capturing those inbound and outbound trips as well.
Yeah.
Hey y'all, so a point I want to make is that on the equity side, like there's sort of a catch-22 with electric vehicles, EVs and charging infrastructure, in that like they're still too expensive for any low or moderate income people to afford, unless there's some sort of like, I don't know, a city program with super cheap maybe used vehicles or something like that. And so, like, on the one hand, it's good or there needs to be a proliferation of EV charging infrastructure in order for EVs to be really usable. On the other hand, like, it's still, to be short term without some sort of city program or state program that provides low and moderate income people with low cost EVs, like, expanding that charging infrastructure is going to inherently be for middle and upper middle class and wealthy folks. That's something we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, yeah, and when you see our strategies, we've got numerous strategies that are focused on incentivization of charging infrastructure and vehicles and tolls and all sorts of things, focused specifically on low income and communities of color.
Great, thanks. And then the other point I posted in the chat in case folks haven't seen, and that and this goes for transportation and land use advisory group as well as transportation electrification, is that any strategy that entails new development, or whether it's transit infrastructure or EV charging stations, needs to really have each strategy needs to have some sort of explicit anti-gentrification measures, because, for example, adding EV charging infrastructure is going to make increase land value, and so that's you know, if we're adding EV charging infrastructure and that's contributing to land value rise, then displaces the low-income people of color who then can't use it. You know, that's inherently a problem.
Yep.
Zach, has the working group identified anti-displacement measures or resources that they could use to sort of build upon?
I mean, there's been conversation about exactly this comment about putting charging stations in areas. Yeah, I will. You know, our group has another meeting on Friday. I'll bring that, you know, specific question back to them. You know, part of the interesting thing with this is that, you know, we all are surrounded by EV infrastructure. You know, it's just called outlets. And many people just use level 1 at home or at a workplace, and it is super low cost and works. So I think part of this is balancing this, like, how much is this like big expensive infrastructure that like creates value, and how much of this is just like enabling easy access to electricity, which we already have and is low cost. So yeah, I'll bring the anti-displacement question, specifically back to them.
Hey, Zach, this is Drew. You mentioned tolls, and could you just spend a couple of seconds talking through kind of like, are they talking about congestion pricing? Are they talking about special lanes that you can get in if you have an EV? It'd be helpful to hear a little bit more about that. And then when you're done, I think I'm going to have a follow-up question.
Yeah. No, the specific strategy, it's not in here in detail. It will be in the document you'll see later. Is focusing on partnering with CTRMA. CTRMA is the group that runs all of the toll roads and the tolling like in the Austin area. So it would be partnering with them to figure out how could you offer reduced or free tolling for these communities that, and this is like an equity focused strategy that like if people of color have been pushed out further, if you've been pushed to Pflugerville but you're still commuting into the Austin area and you're having to drive on 130 and 290 every single day. If that person could get in a low cost electric vehicle and have reduced tolling, that you could really like help some folks out with that additional cost. And so the question is like, who ends up paying that? Because like asking CTRMA to make it free, like it's not going to work. But how would the subsidy get paid for? And then how would you create it and design it in a way that would make sure that we weren't like giving Teslas free rides, and that we were giving like the right people in the right vehicles lower cost rides?
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. And so I do have a follow-up question, and this might be something that we need to talk about on a different day.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that there are likely to be amongst the various subgroups similar sorts of questions about, in the Cap Metro, we'd like to make it free, but that's 20% of the revenue. How do we make up that rest of that 20%? For the toll roads, how do we offset some of those costs? A lot of the stuff is going to cost money, as we all well know. And so I think it's a steering committee function to be thinking through how much the various task groups are thinking about revenue being raised and how much that actually is and where that comes from. And if there's other sorts of things that can be brought into the conversation, right? We had that Portland tax idea that we talked about months ago. Is that something we want to put back on the table or something similar? And this stuff is going to cost money, and we're going to have to figure out where that money comes from in a way that's politically viable. Otherwise, I think this is likely to wither and die on the vine, which I don't think any of us want. And I would encourage the group to be thinking through what we can be doing, whether through the political group or others, to make that cost conversation one that is not a liability, but a benefit to the program that we're trying to get forward.
That's a great point, Drew. Thanks. We will definitely be, and you'll see at the end we have a slide that some things that have come up across multiple groups. I think capturing those concepts that are going to need big picture addressing across all the groups, like these big picture cost items, is definitely something that's in the steering committee's work. Thanks.
I think we got to move on to the next section.
Next one. Next is natural systems. You want to jump in, Caitlin?
Yeah. So hello, everyone. Glad to be here sharing with you some of our work. getting really exciting. I'm really excited to show you guys everything we've come up with, I guess, next week. So natural systems, we broke out our work kind of into 4 categories that really looked at different levers or spheres of influence. So that was natural lands, working lands, private lands, which really ended up being tree canopy, and public lands. So each of those categories then ended up with a goal. So our goals for natural land is protecting existing carbon pools by having a certain number of acres under legal protections and having all of those protected lands participating either in active restoration or a management plan that addresses resilience. One thing to note both on the natural lands and working lands goals, we are still working through quantification of the number of acres for those goals. But overall, our goal is to propose something that achieves sequestration for about 4% of the city's overall emissions. But we're just still kind of working back into those numbers. So for working lands, the goal would be to protect prime farmland by having X% of available prime farmland soils within Austin Travis County participating in a regenerative agriculture program. For private lands, again, this group really kind of hitched their wagon to tree canopy. So moving towards achieving a 50% tree canopy cover citywide, focusing on increasing that canopy cover in areas where there's currently lower than average canopy, which is mostly the Eastern Crescent. And then for public lands, the goal is to have all city-owned lands under a landscape management plan that results in neutral or negative carbon emissions and maximizes community co-benefits. So again, like the other 2 groups have shown, this, there's 5-ish strategies under each of these goals to get us to those goals. And you're just going to see a few of them today. The next slide. All right, so our top 2 strategies that look at equity and climate. I will say we had some really good and exciting conversation around green jobs. But we're going to talk about those later, so they're not necessarily part of our strategies for the time being. So the 2 I've included here are green space access and function. We've got some really cool ideas about identifying and reclaiming mono-use, underutilized, or unconventional public spaces to both increase community access and ecological functions and provide multi-benefits. So we're talking about things like impervious cover, traditional kind of lawn park landscapes, things like that, right-of-ways, just some of that kind of tactical green space urbanism. And then community tree planting strategy around increasing city funding for programs that are doing community tree planting at multiple scales, especially those that are working in low-income communities and communities of color. And I'll say kind of overall, as we've been going through the equity evaluations, something that has really stood out as being helpful in those equity evaluations is a lot of our recommendations around promoting, supporting, and partnering with community-based NGOs that are already doing work rather than creating new city programs. It's funding and growing existing community-based programs in partnership with the city. So that was something that's really kind of risen to the top, and we have multiple strategies that have recommendations like that. So then the 2 that we are thinking still need a little bit of work. You might be about to hear some dog barks. I apologize if that happens. Are preserving natural lands, and this kind of goes for the working lands as well, that we have some strategies around identifying additional lands that warrant protections and implementing protections for those. There's still some work to be done around defining what warranting protection is, but also just preserving large tracts of land is we're finding challenges to equate that back to equity in terms of access, because they're generally large tracts that are kind of outside the city. So we're still kind of working through how we ensure access and benefits to communities with those lands. And then generally, as we've been going through the equity evaluations, we've had a lot of conversations about accountability related to funding, and just acknowledging that in a planning process like this, we can't really ensure that funding is going to be there to implement these recommendations. And so we've had some long conversations about how that is this a disingenuous process because we're going to recommend all these things that don't have funding for them potentially. And so there's been some really great conversation around that we're going to be highlighting in our equity conversations, that we're not really sure that we can provide the answer to that as part of our ag recommendations, but making sure that that's acknowledged fully.
Yeah, except, I will say that we very much underutilize some of our like utility fee, like our stormwater drainage utility fee. That fund is so underutilized, and I don't think that we're really, I don't know. Has that been something you've been talking about, like not coming out of budget line items for the city, but looking at some of the enterprise funds?
Yeah, we have, and especially on the goal around the tree canopy, we've talked about what sources of funding we can find from like developer fees and things like that, that could go there. But the utility fees, I think we talked about when we were talking about restoration of riparian areas. I think we brought up that. I would have to go back and look specifically, but I'll note it.
I'll also just note that the city just approved the Austin Civilian Conservation Corps, which is only a 6-month program to start with, but could lead to a much bigger thing. And I talked with Councilmember Alter's office this week about how that initial $2 million of funds could be leveraged to, to get in place a lot of other restoration and even some fee-for-service work in areas where people can afford it, but to get a lot of things done. So I think we should really be dreaming big about what we want to see accomplished, because there could be ready, boots on the ground ready to do some cool stuff.
Yeah, we're really excited to see what can come out of that conservation corps idea. It's really cool.
Rodrigo has a question about carbon farming.
Oh, has the concept of carbon farming come up? Have there been discussions about using compost? Yes, so yes to both. Under the working lands strategies, we call it regenerative ag, and actually I was just on a phone call yesterday with a nonprofit that works in that area, and regenerative agriculture has a bunch of things that can be considered regenerative agriculture, and carbon farming is one of those multiple things. We haven't gone as far as defining what we consider regenerative ag. That's kind of in our minds the next step when we start getting into implementation, would be defining that for the city. We had some interesting conversation about that too, about defining that from the ground up, top down. But then we do have a strategy about requiring carbon farming on community gardens. So anywhere that there's a community garden on public lands, and then we account for what burden that maybe puts on the community garden participants then, and how we can mitigate that with these additional requirements. But yeah, so we talk about carbon farming, both kind of small scale and large scale. And then we specifically have a strategy that says use compost more, the local compost. And generally the use of compost is one of the regenerative agriculture practices, but we also specifically get into the use of the local compost and why it's not used more widely, and what can we do to make it better quality so that people locally want to use the local compost coming from the city.
Caitlin, have you talked about setting up a regional carbon bank?
Like carbon credit trading. So
Yeah.
We have a strategy under natural lands that says the city should explore and look into more creative financing mechanisms for land preservation. And we specifically say things like carbon credit trading, like local carbon credit trading that has local benefits as well as carbon benefits, as well as we bring up stormwater credit trading, which is the same idea but not quite as fully developed yet. And then like benefit stacking, similar idea for agriculture land. So yeah, we have a strategy around generally in interesting financing mechanisms that aren't fully vetted out, and making sure that those are local and providing local benefits along with carbon benefits.
Yeah, I think that one's an important one. Yeah, okay. Anything else?
Yeah. I was gonna say that's like our number 2 under natural land. It's like protect natural lands and then reevaluate our carbon credit purchasing. All right, I see a couple chats. Ricardo has one on transportation, so I think that's for Mark. Or Ricardo, was that for transportation or is that related to natural lands?
Sorry, no, it was still back on transportation.
Okay,
Sorry.
just making sure
that there's some side conversation, including the chat about the tiny transit style stuff.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something that was supposed to be related to natural lands there. And then Susanna has a comment about using drainage fees. Yeah, I impervious cover. Okay. Yes, this is, I'm going to just copy and paste this whole comment because there's a lot of detail in there to bring up with our group. So thank you for that. And I believe the drainage fees, I think that was the conversation we had around the riparian restoration funding.
Yeah. Caitlin, just to tag it, I also made a comment about Blackland Prairie restoration and not just thinking about riparian tree planting and urban ag pieces. But yeah. That's all.
Sorry, I must have missed that up there. But and yeah, that is actually specifically, there's a qualifier to that natural lands goal. Is it, did I put it in there, Zach? Will you go back up one? Yeah, I left that qualifier out because there was just a lot of words here already, but we actually have a qualifier to that goal that is around new land acquisition being in ecoregions that currently do not have as much protection. There's only 2 ecoregions in Austin, Edwards Plateau, Prairie, so that would be the Blackland Prairie. So focusing new acquisitions on the Blackland Prairie.
A big picture thing, I don't know if it comes here or if it's considered part of the climate plan, but like so I 100% support Blackland Prairie restoration. But on the other side, there's, the potential for the big fire, sort of engulfing most of West Austin, and whatever can be done to help prevent that will also be, sort of net a lot of not loss if we can keep that from happening.
Yeah, and this conversation about management plans that address resilience, a big part of that conversation is resilience to climate change and wildfire. Wildfire is also an important part of the ecosystem. So yeah, there's been conversation around that, and I think, yeah, maybe we should just mention that specifically, that management plan should consider resilience and maybe wildfire impacts specifically. Just call that out.
I really like what Rodrigo just said in the chat.
Potential tie to equity. Yeah. capture.
All right, I think we got to move on to consumption. Last comment? Yep. Sorry, what was someone saying?
No, I said great. Jen, can you take it away?
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, hi, everybody. This is Jen with the Consumption Advisory Group. I want to just start off by just thanking and expressing my gratitude to all the Consumption Advisory Group members. I mean, these folks are putting in many, many hours to come up with these recommendations for all of y'all's consideration, including working well into the evenings on Fridays, meeting at 8 in the morning, multiple days in a row. So just a tremendous thank you. And I just want to acknowledge all of your hard work and time and effort and generosity and all of theirs as well. Consumption has 3 groups that are specifically focused on consumption, and then 1 shared with sustainable buildings that Phoebe will talk about in a minute. So for each of those 3 working groups that I'm going to share, they've each developed 1 kind of headline goal that you see on the screen here. So I've broken them down by their respective groups. The first one is for the consumer goods working group, and they're really focused on individual and household level non-food product consumptions and the associated equity and environmental impacts with that. And right now, the way that they're capturing their goal is to position Austin as not just a national, but also a global waste reduction leader by reducing a community-wide per capita disposal rate so that Austin's among the top 5 lowest disposal rates in the US and among the C40 cities that Austin's already part of that international network. Really, the consumer goods and the institutional purchasing groups, they're focused on helping folks understand and take action to lower consumption overall, and for the things that are, necessary and critical for all of us to survive and thrive, to help them choose lower impact product choices as well. So I'll just point out that this first goal for the consumer goods group really gets at the consuming less, thus resulting in less waste. It doesn't fully get to the choose differently, buy differently piece, but we think that it's the most measurable way to get at the bulk of the ideas that they've discussed. The second group is institutional purchasing, which is still focused on non-food products, but at a larger scale. So anything outside of like an individual or household purchasing level. So it includes small and medium businesses all the way up to very large institutional buyers like Seton Ascension, the city, the county, UT, et cetera. And their goal right now is they do want to tie it to a greenhouse gas reduction goal, even though we don't yet have a solid way to measure the full life cycle emissions from the different types of products that we consume. But we have some ideas for others on how to do that. We've got some draft data that we can build upon. So by 2030, they're wanting to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by a to be determined amount as it relates to non-residential purchasing. And then the third group is the food working group. They're addressing the full life cycle impact of food at all scales, individual consumer choices, and large institutional food procurement and serving as well. So by 2030, their focus is to ensure 100% of Austinites, with a focus on those that are food insecure, can access a pro-climate, pro-health food system that's built for equity and resilience. And then the next slide, please. So these are some examples of our strategies that are in process. I was not prepared to tell you what the top 2 strategies were, so I'm giving you some example strategies that we think really address both the equity and the climate side of things well. So the first one is focused on kind of circular economy workforce development, and that is kind of beefing up a workforce development program that includes training for folks to learn repair and reuse skills and help with job placement into local circular businesses, with a focus on prioritizing the needs and skills of low-income communities and those of color to preserve their traditions, provide income, and positively impact the environment. The second one I wanted to share with you today was related to a sustainable purchasing network. So this is having this city either create or join a sustainable purchasing network that provides all of the benefits listed there below. So it does help to buy things at scale and use our collective purchasing power through cooperative purchasing mechanisms or other means. It does include just kind of general industry knowledge building, education, and awareness. Research into which product categories could most benefit from like standards development and standardized contracting templates and things of those natures. Member networking, again, just to help people really access low impact products. And then also some example contract language and templates that people can access. And then under the grouping of kind of strategies that we're still working on, the food working group has some awesome ideas that they have broken down into 5 distinct categories around kind of food access and food waste. And there are several sub-strategies within those categories. And so that group really needs some more time to kind of prioritize all of their ideas into a tightened up list of 5 discrete strategies that are going to have the biggest kind of combined climate and equity impact. So I did share an example for you here on the screen that's related to increasing access at the retail level. So this would be, for example, through like groceries and farmers markets and restaurants, with a focus on really improving access to healthy foods for everybody, including food insecure folks. So it's ensuring double dollars are accepted at all SNAP outlets, developing programs to support SNAP and WIC clients and facilitate better use, finding innovative ways to provide greater access to local produce for food insecure community members. For example, maybe a subsidized CSA model that incorporates regenerative agricultural growers who also employ marginalized community members. And then still kind of figuring this one out, but supporting investments in community-driven, pro-health, pro-climate, food-related businesses, again, with an emphasis on underserved areas. So the pro-health is really focused on encouraging kind of a shift towards more plant-based choices, as is the pro-climate language. So it's a way of getting at, we need to turn less dirt and from the production side of things to reduce carbon emissions. We need to start shifting away from meat towards more plant-based sources and reducing food waste across the board. So I'll open it up for comment there.
You had a question.
Sure, go for it.
Well, I'll just read it. It says, how is waste defined in Goal 1? Waste to landfill or waste to any different pathway like reuse, refurbish, etc.?
It would be leaning on the Austin Resource Recovery's existing waste diversion study that does look at waste that ends up at the landfill, at composting facilities and recycling facilities. I don't think we yet have a reliable mechanism for tracking avoided waste production.
But I think the goal is around waste to landfill, if I'm not mistaken.
I can bring that up with the group.
Are you talking about just are you talking about food or?
No.
Goal 1 under consumer goods.
Number 1.
No, that was actually, waste generation as a whole.
Yeah, that was my take too.
Also reducing, the flow to recycling and composting.
Hi, this is Elizabeth from Austin Resource Recovery. I can provide a little bit of clarity on that. So this would be.
We can't hear you very well.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. No. I'll write it in the chat.
That was worse.
Oh.
While she's typing in the chat, I'll also address some of the comments about regenerative ag techniques. This is something that the consumption and then the natural systems advisory groups, we've been trying to figure out how to kind of divide and conquer and make sure that we're addressing the full the full supply chain of food from the point of production and harvesting up until it's disposed of if it's not fully consumed. And so we're trying to make sure that those linkages are there, but the food production is really showing up right now in the natural system side of things. But we'll make sure that that's covered across both. Food working group. And Karen's pointing out that we've also addressed it in the food working group in the consumption side.
Should we?
Yeah, I see a lot of interest on the regenerative agriculture. That's an active area of discussion and will definitely show up in the strategies. You're just, again, seeing a snapshot of it.
Great. Okay, so let's jump to the last group here. Thanks, Jen. Phoebe?
Okay, hi everyone. All right, so just to echo some of what has been said, advisory group members have been dedicating a lot of time. I feel like all of our phone calls have ended with a plan for yet another phone call, and so super appreciative of that. I think you'll notice that, it was hard to choose, like, which are the best, which are still in progress, because everything still, I think, needs more thought process, and we welcome all of the feedback that you can provide. And so these are the 4 goals. One of them is actually from Water Forward, so I'll get to that in a second and some of the thoughts that we have on that. So the first goal is that all buildings will be net zero carbon by 2030, all existing buildings by 2040. The 2040 was based on, our target to be net zero altogether by 2040. And we really wanted to include something that acknowledged that we recognize that energy burden, energy poverty are issues, and that we want to reduce that. I think there can certainly be wordsmithing around this that's more focused. I did see a couple of comments from Katie and Mayuri regarding, thinking about specific neighborhoods, specific census tracts, and all of that. So that's certainly something that we welcome into the conversation. For the second goal, it's to reduce embodied carbon from building materials by 40% from a baseline that we will establish by 2025 that looks at a 2020 baseline. And so part of that is to also ensure that the embodied carbon footprint at that point is less than 100 pounds of CO2 equivalent by square foot. And that is based off of the International Living Institute and what they see as an average baseline across different buildings. For goal number 3, it is to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions from refrigerant leakage by 25%. So there's still some quantification work that Kevin is helping us with to try to have a better picture of what our refrigeration emissions are in the city. And so there's work being done on that end, but 25% leakage seemed like a good target based on the fact that a lot of the leakage rate is coming from grocery stores. And so if you can reduce that by half, then, you can get closer to that target. For the 4th goal, that is taken directly from the 2040 goal that Water Forward has. Something that, was noted that was, and when I was trying to interpret what was in the Water Forward goal and put it into this, I needed help from the Water Forward people because I wasn't sure what any of this meant. So Marisa had to come in here and rewrite it from the way that I had written it. And so part of this is just that this is very difficult to understand and to put into what this actually means. And so the water group is going to come back and try to think about a way that we can rewrite this goal in a way that's more accessible. And I know that this is kind of the case for a lot of these technical terms, but I wanted to just note that we had noticed that this goal and the way that it's written is hard to understand. So we'll go to the next slide. So I had a hard time, again, isolating 2 and 2. And so something that we talked about and that we kept hearing from feedback in our workshops, and even as we're getting some of the information from the ambassadors, is that there needs to be targeted outreach to low-income communities, communities of color, because there are a lot of available resources as far as repair programs, energy efficiency, renewable energy rebates. Of course, that is, something that Austin Energy is kind of taking on as part of the generation plan and the equity work that they're doing there. But I think establishing some form of targeted outreach so that we can get feedback to improve those programs, so that we can ensure that more people know about them and that can use these strategies to mitigate energy burden, mitigate energy poverty, et cetera, is being stated as an intent. I did include electrification here because that's part of a climate goal that, and I feel like the principles of this top one will leak into this. So part of this is to really think about how we can encourage electrification. And then there's a lot of components and a lot of literature out there about how to do how to incorporate electrification strategies in an equitable way. And so this is one of those things that, everything is connected to, we need to ensure electrification to meet our climate goals, but we also need to take the principles of having more equitable access and more equitable outreach into that work. Something else that has been discussed with the water group has been, thinking about advanced metering infrastructure. So that's a huge, in a way that's a great step forward for water conservation, because it takes into account that, leaking is a huge problem. And so having enhanced meter accuracy is a good thing for water conservation. At the same time, there's recognition that when you have more accurate water or meter reading accuracy, then you're going to have increased costs, right? Now that we know exactly how much water is being used, that may lead to higher water bills. And so how do you ensure that there's communication and community engagement? Can you conduct a pilot strategy for this AMI rollout that is part of the Water Forward process, and ensure that you take feedback from the community, that there's communication, that people are participating in a customer assistance program and are singled out as a group that will be disproportionately affected? And how can we also take into account this Internet of Things and smart cities, smart technology movement, and think about the digital divide and lack of internet access as well? And so there's a lot here, and I think this was, something that was really well thought out. There was research done by Dr. Solis for Water Forward on this that looked at AMI, that looked at the CAP program, that looked at workforce development, and tried to look at equitable strategies. So we'll continue to make we're meeting back again this week to finalize some of the other strategies. So what still needs work? We started looking at the equity tool, and two that I think we've gotten hung up on are the affordability and accountability. Caitlin already went into the accountability and, how can we ensure that there's funding to make these strategies successful? How can we ensure that there's tracking, demographic and otherwise, that ensures success? All of that is important, and it's difficult, and there need to be mechanisms in place in an implementation plan that discuss this. With affordability, we have to acknowledge that an upgraded building can be more expensive, and that can have a cascading effect into displacement and all of these things. So even if you're upgrading a building, that reduces your energy costs because of increased energy efficiency, what are some unintended consequences that could come from that as well? And so it's very complicated. There's a lot of nuance, and so it's something that we spent a lot of time. And so I think the way that we are going to go about it is to write in all the potential things to keep in mind and make some recommendations for an implementation plan that say, we recognize that A, B, C, and D could happen, and here are some things that the implementation task force, or whoever that may be, that decision maker, has to keep in mind in order to have a mitigating effect. And a couple of others, so partnerships are really important as part of this. with the building materials market, this is something that we still need to figure out the exact wording, but we want to acknowledge that there's a local materials market that we need to tap into to decarbonize materials, high impact materials specifically. And there's a lot of, equity considerations for small businesses. There's equity considerations with the types of organizations that we work with. And so that's one that still needs some work. And then another one with quantification regarding, so something that we acknowledged was that to reduce refrigeration, actually reducing using HVAC tonnage at all, right, is really important through passive design strategies. How are we going to encourage that? How are we going to make that connection clear from an education end? And so that's another one that also requires work. And so that's kind of an at-large overview. I'll look here at any, Yoop, I'm going to read your comment. What policy actions, funding partners is necessary to get the 100 net zero retrofit by 2040? It's a huge goal. Yes, so, and so the reason that we chose that 2040 target was because it was necessary to meet an overall 2040 target. A lot of like C40, for example, is doing an all existing buildings by 2050. And so that's what that declaration says, new buildings 2030, all buildings 2050. And so, part of the strategies are going to be to decarbonize, new buildings and to try to increase energy efficiency, have electrify existing portfolio, but that's really where some of this gets really complicated with electrifying the existing portfolio. That can be costly. What does the market look like as far as making sure that that's affordable for everybody, accessible for everybody? And so, this is an incomplete list of what we have. So I think sharing all of the different strategies will provide a better picture, but we have benchmarking in there. We have some actions from Texas Gas that are yet to be determined, but there is a decarbonization strategy for Texas Gas to actually try to reduce their footprint and therefore, kind of tap into that part of the existing portfolio that has a gas hookup. And so, yeah, let me see. Additionally, retrofits should be prioritized for low income. Yes, and so we've tried to word that into our strategies as far as like prioritizing, the outreach and the incentives. There is work, I think, for the existing programs that are in place as far as weatherization programs, retrofit programs, et cetera. And so it does require a lot of collaboration across different departments to ensure that we are getting this done and that this is targeted. And so I think once we share all the strategies together, please help us with ensuring that intent is there in the wording. And, if we need to add additional narrative from the equity tool and otherwise as to considerations along the way, add that in as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Phoebe. So I'm going to jump back, and we are almost at the end here. This has been fantastic. So the last slide we have on this, on the strategies, is that there have been, there have been ideas that have been coming up kind of that are across all of these groups, and ideas that don't really get necessarily addressed in any one of these. So this is just a couple of those. And I think we could probably add on this the idea that Drew brought up earlier about big picture funding mechanisms. So big picture funding mechanisms, I think, would be one. Another one is this whole idea of negative emissions and carbon dioxide removal strategies. Like, we have the natural systems group, but in that group, it's been brought up that just like this bigger picture of pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, like how could that happen? How do we ensure equity? How could it happen in Austin? How would that fit into this plan? So that's one idea. Then the other one was just around green jobs, workforce training, et cetera. I think the word workforce training or job training was in most of these slides. You're going to see when we put all the strategies together, that this has come up across all the groups. So how is there maybe a specific program or a different program that addresses this topic across addresses those strategies across the whole plan? And then I'm sure as we put all of these goals and strategies together, there will probably be other ones that come up like this. So we're just gonna have to think about how do these big picture ideas like fit into the story of this. Okay, so moving to the end here. So as we have, as we've gone through all these draft goals and strategies, as almost everybody said, they have some sort of final meetings that are happening this week. And then we're going to try to pull it all together kind of over the weekend on Monday. And then by close of business Monday, I'm going to try to have one document that has all of the goals and strategies fully in one place. So then by close of business Monday, I'm going to be reaching out to those folks who want to put in the time to review and comment on the goals and strategies and get to work on that. And essentially, like, we'll probably have a call. There will definitely be like a week-long period. The way that we've been doing it with my advisory group, which I think we're going to stick with, is that we create like a comment document where everyone logs their comments with what are they commenting on, what is the comment, and then we have a space for addressing the comments, and then we make the changes. Just because if we open this up to like everyone reviewing and editing, it's just going to turn into an absolute mess. So that's kind of where we are with the schedule. I mean, this is a really exciting time in terms of pulling all this together and getting this first review. We're going to really start to have a much better picture on what's really going to end up in this plan. So any comments or questions on kind of like where we're at? And Katie, if you're back, do we want to talk about next steps in the next meeting?
Yeah, I think, something obviously that we're dealing with right now is just trying to figure out how much depth to get into in these meetings and how we want to feel like we're efficiently using our time. But obviously, I know folks have signed up for different parts of the review cycle and development of content. I guess, just wanted to have a few minutes to talk about our next bi-weekly meeting that'll be on the 27th, how we want to use that agenda time to check in. Do we want to, so one thought I had is, part of the role of the steering committee is going to be kind of resolving, maybe a difference of opinion on what a target should be, or digging into looking at how maybe the natural systems working group overlaps with the consumption working group on the ag stuff, or, kind of looking at the overlap pieces, but also maybe the points of conflict and trying to talk through those. Those were two things that I thought might make sense for us to bring up at that point, since we'll have comments back by the 25th.
I think that's the best use of our time. I think that's a good high level to start off with. Find out what the commonalities that we have going on, and then also what overlaps one another. So therefore, that makes sense also.
Yeah, and Rodrigo just mentioned any emerging equity issues or concerns that are unresolved. And so I think, today we focused on some of the big exciting things that the working groups have talked about, and some of the stuff that hasn't been fully baked, as Zach said, and so talking a little bit more about maybe where there's some thinking that needs to be done around equity that working groups are having trouble with. So I think, so opportunities to think more thoughtfully, conflicts, and overlaps, I feel like could be the framing of the next meeting.
Yeah, and I think when we want to go into this next meeting, I think we want to go into with some things that are doable. I think there's a lot of things perhaps we can put on the agenda, but it wouldn't make good use of our time. And I think we're at the point now where we want to try to make good use of our time, better use of our time.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think the folks who really want to dive into the details, I think that's part of why I think, the work that's going to happen offline, and reviewing and developing content is the detail work. And I think that plan sounds good. Anyone else have anything to add? Okay. Does anyone have any ideas about how we want to start our first 10 minutes on the next meeting?
Katie, I'm sorry, this is Jen. I didn't get my mute off fast enough, but I just want to confirm that there'll also be some written feedback from the steering committee to the advisory group so that they don't all have to be on these calls to get the feedback.
So the feedback from today, I'm assuming Celine is compiling, and that, each of the staff leads for each of those groups will be relaying that feedback back. And trying to weave that in. And then in terms of feedback going forward, I think the structure that has set up where steering committee members have volunteered to be a part of one of those 4 steps or multiple, I think will be more written comment feedback on these things that individuals are going to be compiling themselves. And that I think the work of the steering committee is going to be touching base about that for sure. But I think really having more focus on the 3 things I just mentioned.
That's great. That'll be helpful to have it written for them to kind of incorporate and respond to. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I would defer to Zach and the rest of y'all on staff about how you want to keep that organized and formatted. And so if there's a team of 5 who are working on content on the steering committee or content review, if you want to do, I don't know how you want to compile comments to keep things organized, but however y'all think is going to work best, we'll try to make sure we're using some sort of standard process too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we are. Yeah. Kenneth, so great to see you in person. Hey.
All right. Anything else, y'all?
Katie, can as part of our agenda, can we specifically highlight anti-displacement measures? I think it's applicable to all working groups.
Yeah, I totally agree. I guess, yes, I totally agree. It seems like that's something that should be being baked into, all the discussions about the recommendations already. And so I guess wrapping my brain around like that at a high level. So how do you, sorry. Sorry. My dogs have been so good about not barking.
Happens to me all the time.
So anyway, I guess at a high level, I guess I want to, at this point, make sure that we are making direct recommendations for how we can mitigate that. And I don't want to just stay at a high level theoretically around the anti-displacement work. Does that make sense? So yeah. Is that just, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, maybe Shane, if you had any thoughts around how we could approach that as a steering committee.
I mean, I generally agree with what Kate just said of, we should be naturally, or of course, we should be giving specific recommendations. I was going to ask, and I think this is would partially address that question, is are we planning to do, like we had done the equity working group, we have the goals working group, are we planning to do working groups like that and schedule those outside of steering committee time for each of these working groups we're volunteering for? I'm sorry if I missed that explicitly while we were talking about them. I accidentally deleted a steering committee email and that confused me, and I am bad at multitasking.
Are you talking about the 4 review groups?
Right, the 4 review groups, are we scheduling meetings for those or outside of steering committee time?
Yes.
Zach, do you want to comment on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like for the group that's going to review all the goals and strategies, yes, I will be setting that up like in the coming weeks. So,
Okay, so those are emails that are going to be going out soon, and we'll figure all that out.
and they're
Okay,
going to
great.
happen
Yeah,
like
so that
in succession.
right. Okay. Right. Yeah. So that would be where I see we address those specific points, and I think the folks who there's a good subset of the folks who volunteered for the goal strategy review who particularly bring in expertise and equity in that perspective to address that issue.
Yeah, agreed.
And I also think, there were a bunch of comments today that were more specific about being more thoughtful about some of these strategies, or maybe we could think about that differently, or whatever it was. But, I think just generally going back and having folks say at each of the steering committee or each of the working groups that, like, we want to make sure that we're really, weaving in ideas around anti-displacement. Then, I mean, I think that could be a general feedback in addition to the more specific feedback we gave on this call.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think we'll just be getting into the more specific feedback when we do these plan working groups, editing the plan and the feedback and stuff.
Okay. All right, y'all. It's 12:01. Anything else before we hop off?
Hey, this is Karen. I've been struggling. I know I've waited to the very last second here I've been struggling with how to say, coming from the food working group, like there's really, Jen's best ability to keep us on target. Like we're nowhere near ready. We've not even approached applying the equity tool. We still have 15 strategies for that align with our five strategies at 15 points, and like there's really great work happening. We're meeting every day, and so I guess the question is like my perspective that I'm going to take back. We're meeting in an hour is like, okay, so we're just going to send everything over and just let it be known that it's either that we're still working on it. I mean, there's just the timing and the rush of this is a point of frustration that we've spent like so much great time getting to this point and then just insufficient time to really like have everyone be able to, like, we've lost a lot. Not just because of pandemic, that definitely plays a part of it, especially with the food working group. I mean, a little bit of a broken record here, but just feel like it hadn't been said, and someone coming from a working group that feels like there's really great work going on, and just a real frustration that we're not able to spend the time to get these to a place where they could really be impactful. And so just wanted to make sure that was said, because it felt like it was missing. And I guess the question is coming from guidance of like, what's preferred? Like, do you want us to be late and get these to a more refined point? Because yes, I recognize there's time. This is an ongoing process, or send everything over, I guess, is where we're down to.
Yeah, so I think this is the first, that we've had a conversation about people feeling really pinched by the timeline. And so I think we've always said that, from the beginning of this process that, rushing or timelines that are being imposed and saying we have to get it done by this time is a barrier to having impactful, equitable outcomes. And so I think that the other thing that I've been thinking about in this call is just making sure that we're balancing, like, us providing feedback as a steering committee as the process is going along, but then also probably being a little redundant with things that folks are already talking about, but maybe we just haven't gotten that download yet, or it hasn't been formalized in the writing that we're looking at. And so I guess, how formal do we want, or how fully baked do we want things before we comment on them, versus like, how much do we want to be brought along, recognizing that, like, we're providing some comments, but that might be stuff you're already thinking about. I think that's a balance we're trying to strike. I don't know. What do others think?
I'm sorry to have pushed
to
the end.
No, it's okay. Thanks for bringing this up, Karen. And yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, Katie. And I think that's part of the need for steering committee members to be attending advisory groups as they're available. And so, yeah, definitely want to reiterate and and second, the point of, if the timeline or the deadlines, the current deadline doesn't fit or does with y'all really centering and practicing equity, then the timeline has to change. So
yeah, because we've even
and
lost
in particular,
for, like equitable participation. I mean, it's like we've lost so much. Like I think
right.
Great minds working on it love that the people that are still able to come together. But yeah, like just the considerations of I've been feeling like we don't even have. We spent all this time developing the team, and yet we've lost a lot. So anyway.
I guess
yes.
Karen, if you want to follow up maybe with Shane and I and Zach and maybe, I don't know, anyone else who's interested, I think we should take this conversation offline and figure out if there are some ways that we can help to recoup what you've lost. And I also, I think, would pitch this back to Zach and ask to just do a check-in with, the leaders of the different working groups to make sure that we're balancing wanting to be productive and stay on some kind of schedule, but certainly not making people feel like we're not doing as good of work as we set out to do because we're feeling rushed. So I think if Zach, are you willing to, can you check in with folks and figure out like if we need to adapt what we can do?
Yep, I will.
Does that sound good, Karen?
Y'all, that's it. Yeah, thanks. That's exactly what I was going to say. And we can, if some groups are ahead and ready, like let's start with those. And we don't, we can't review every single group's set of actions all at the same time anyway.
Okay. All right. Well, so Zach, do you want to just maybe send an email out to the group once you've kind of gone through some of those conversations and touched base with working groups and let us know what's being adapted and what's changing, and we'll talk more offline.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Karen. I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of feedback we want to hear from folks on these calls, and like, we need to be adaptable in this process because, I think what I am most proud of in this process is that it feels like we created a culture of trust and empathy at the beginning, and we've continued to have communication that allows us to maintain that. And it feels like people still really believe in this. And if there's something putting that at risk, then that is really important to bring that up. All right. Well, I'll touch base with all those folks soon, and we will look to see you guys in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep it up and stay safe.
Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.